Y'all, can I tell you about these Tecovas boots? I don't know if y'all know this, but these boots are handmade, high quality, stylish, and comfortable right out of the box. I know we buy everything online these days, but boots are something you really should get fitted for. And it just so happens Tecovas is based right here in Austin. So come shop with me at the Tecovas store on South Congress or the Domain. That's TECOVAS.com. Don't go gently, y'all. Today on CityCast Austin, last year, more than 600,000 Austin homes were cleared for demolition, changing our neighborhoods and filling up landfills. Should we be holding on more tightly to our past? My guest, Preservation Austin's Megan King, says yes. CityCast Austin is brought to you by our exclusive launch sponsor, Tecovas. It's Monday, August 19th. I'm Nikki Devon, and this is what Austin's talking about. Hello, everyone. I am with Megan King, Policy and Outreach Coordinator for Preservation Austin. Hi, Megan. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So Preservation Austin is an organization that is focused on preserving Austin's architectural history. Is that correct?
Yes, history and culture. Traditionally, preservation has focused a lot on buildings, and we certainly are invested in buildings, but really it's the people that make the buildings special. And so we kind of see preservation as the tie between places and people. We definitely are not just focused on buildings.
What are the barriers to historic preservation in Austin?
There's a lack of appetite sometimes to preserve. I think people don't necessarily think of Austin as a very historic place. Like, San Antonio has a very strong preservation culture. Obviously, the pace of development in Austin is astronomical. And so that kind of smash and grab mentality partnered with this idea that there's nothing that special here, it makes the pace of demolitions and turnover and displacement that much greater. I think also there's a barrier in people's minds about what preservation is about, and they think it's about like fancy old buildings that very important politicians or businessmen lived in. The sort of history and cultural piece is more, in my more expansive and captures a broader idea of history. We have legacy businesses here in Austin, but they don't necessarily equate like going to a legacy business and supporting them with your dollar as preservation, but it is,
Right.
Because you're helping them stay alive.
Can we give a quick example of what a legacy business is?
Like your classic Austin businesses like Cisco's, Deep Eddy, Green and White Grocery, the Paramount Theater.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a mix of, institutions like the Paramount and the Driscoll.
Mm-hmm.
And then we also had places like Carousel Lounge and the Herb Bar in Bolden. These smaller places that are a bit more niche or maybe more neighborhood specific that not everybody in town knows about.
I think that sometimes there is a misconception that just because something is old, that means we're trying to preserve it.
Mm-hmm.
How do we as a city decide what gets preserved and what is lost?
Yes. Any historic preservation program has a set of criteria that they designate structures based off of. So in Austin, those criteria are architecture, historic association, landscape feature, archaeology, and community value. So in order to become a city of Austin, and those are really broad categories.
Mm-hmm.
In Austin, you have to meet 2 criteria in order to get recommended. And then you also have to have integrity, meaning like, not that the building has to be fancy or nice or even in good condition. It can be in bad condition, but still have integrity because it has its historic features. So they're evaluated on that basis. The city does surveys. Again, like the surveys are just a tool. They don't force anybody to do anything, but they basically, a survey will take a neighborhood context and say, like this is significant. We should make a historic district here.
Why does it matter if a city preserves its historic places?
People need a sense of rootedness and familiarity. It's like a basic psychological need.
Yep.
And Austin has some really amazing places. It's such a unique, interesting, fun place to live. And people, rightfully so, get attached to those familiar places that make them feel like they're at home or like it's the Austin that they know. And like in a more like moral sense, The cost of living here is going up like crazy. People are getting pushed out all the time. The people that made this city the place that it is can no longer afford to live here. The people that made it cool, interesting, desirable, they're gone, or they're leaving, or they're going to be gone soon, you know?
Right.
And preservation is a really important tool in the bigger matrix of anti-displacement.
Right.
Because again, like the smash and grab, like pro-development climate, it's not bad that we're getting new housing. We need more housing. But how do we get it is, I think, where we're like, let's make this a bit more thoughtful.
If I'm a developer and I want to build a new apartment complex and more housing, how does the city ensure that I'm not destroying something historic as a developer before I build something new?
The way historic review goes is if there's a property older than, I think, 45 years old that is being demolished, it gets flagged for historic review. And then the people at City Hall Planning Department will do research into that building, kind of just like a cursory sort of historic background search and like who lived there, any news articles that reference the address or the people that lived there. And then they, from that basis, make a determination of whether or not they'll administratively approve the demolition because there's no historic association. And that's, I would say, most properties get that rubber stamp because it's like, if it doesn't meet even one of the criteria for designation.
Yeah.
But if it meets one and potentially two, then the Historic Landmark Commission will review it and then they'll decide and they make a recommendation. And then it just works up the chain from there.
We heard about a few cases where it says Preservation Austin was in support of certain decisions that happened in the city. I want to talk a little bit about that power. What kind of power does Preservation Austin have?
We are the only citywide preservation nonprofit in town. So our reach is citywide.
And that's wild to me.
Yeah, I know.
That's crazy.
I know. And there's Six Square on the east side. There's East Austin Conservancy, which is a little bit more like financially oriented, but still related to our work. But we're the only ones. We've been around since 1953. But I think being the only citywide preservation nonprofit, we have a unique voice that not very many other organizations have. So we have a kind of global, like, eyes on the whole city perspective.
So I'm a native East Austinite. And, when I was working at City Hall, there was a lot of working together to try to keep certain things, specifically on the East side that you guys are really helpful with. And so part of your work is sometimes homes or just old houses. One structure like this was the Sinigson House on 1100 East 2nd Street, right? And so in that case, please correct me if I'm wrong. As I understand it, the owner wanted to be able to sell the house without restrictions on its future development. But there was another side that was fighting to keep the house intact. Who was fighting to keep the house intact and why?
Well, mainly just us in that case.
Why is it even your business?
I mean, we go to bat for residential properties in East Austin a lot because these are the places that house working class Black and brown people for a really long time. It's tied to anti-displacement, but it's also tied to the stories we want told, right? The everyday stories of East Austin. But in the case of the Sinigson House, the owner came before the Historic Landmark Commission requesting that it be demolished. It was surveyed in 2016. A big historic resource survey of East Austin was done. And the Sinigson House was recommended as an individual City of Austin landmark, which is it's basically the highest honorific a building can receive because
that's a big deal.
It's a zoning change that would prevent the person who owns it from demolishing it or making inappropriate changes. That case was recommended by the Historic Landmark Commission for landmarking. It was then recommended by Planning Commission, which does not very consistently vote in favor of preservation. So then it moved up to City Council with both of those recommendations. And even on council, there was a bit more of an appetite than usual to designate this property. Ultimately, it failed because there's just kind of reliable no votes for designating over an owner's wishes on council. So it didn't get designated.
When they are given this landmark status, they can still sell it.
They can sell it, yes.
They just can't demolish it.
Exactly. If they wanted to make changes to the exterior that were beyond basic maintenance, if they wanted to replace the windows, or if they wanted to add an addition, it would have to get approved by the city.
What does your work look like in practice?
Yeah.
So where do you, because you mentioned that the Planning Commission and then the Historical Landmark Commission. Where do you guys step in, and how do you wield your influence in those moments?
Preservation has this reputation of unfortunate reputation of being a reactive movement where, oh no, something's being demolished, we have to scramble, we have to panic, we have to do something. So that's kind of like the way a lot of people interact with preservation. They don't see the kind of behind the scenes stuff, more proactive stuff. So in the case of the Sinigson House, it was a bit unusual. We kind of just went to bat for that one once it made it to city council, because I think there was just some levers that were not pulled at the right times. But basically, because it was recommended by the survey as a landmark, we really wanted to stick our neck out and say, look, you guys, why are we spending money on these surveys? Look at the surveys and take them seriously, because they're important planning tools. Normally, kind of the sequence, the workflow would be, we will see the case come up at the Historic Landmark Commission. We will usually write a letter, and I will speak and testify. We also have good relationships with pretty much everybody on the Historic Landmark Commission. So we know them, we talk to them. We know a few people on Planning Commission, and obviously we're connected to people on council too. So we're kind of always in dialogue.
Okay.
We also do a lot of like behind the scenes, proactive policy development with council.
Okay, so let's talk about the proactive stuff.
Yeah. We worked with several members on council to get a preservation bonus adopted into the home ordinance of last year. And so what the preservation bonus does is in exchange for preserving an existing home, the incentive you receive in return is the right to increased development entitlements, basically. So it makes it easier for you to develop. You may be more profitable. Basically, it's another tool that would incentivize preservation for people or developers who might never have thought to preserve, because really the math, it's so much easier to demolish than it is to preserve. Wiping the slate clean seems like is the easiest option in a lot of senses, but there's obviously a huge sustainability component to preservation. And by just keeping this existing fabric, we're keeping a lot of waste out of the landfills, because like 25% of our municipal landfills are just construction waste and debris, you know?
Wow.
Crazy amount, really crazy amount.
Oh my God.
Residential demolitions in the city are like over 600 a year, you know?
Jeez.
So it's just a lot of waste, a lot of, embodied carbon that's lost, and then just like fabric of the city that people cherish. So now we have this preservation bonus that it still needs refinement in order to make it fully functional, and still needs some more pieces of it.
I love that.
Another one that we did was house relocation was historically a really common practice in Austin. If you go kind of anywhere in like central Austin, including like central East Austin, you'll find that a lot of the houses there were actually relocated like in like the 20s and 30s from some other neighborhood. It was a really easy practice, common practice in town, but again, with the increasing bureaucratic red tape and also with the value of land in Austin, it's really hard to relocate within city limits. So we worked on this resolution with Ryan Alter's office that would make relocation within the city of Austin easier. Relocation is still a way, it's not perfect preservation by some preservationist definition, but it's certainly better than that history, that Austin story leaving for another city, and gives more people more choices about what to do with historic buildings. Because a lot of people will just give up homes that they don't want on their property and put them on like Facebook Marketplace. Be like, this is going for free if you want to take a house,
Wow.
Because it's just, to them, they'd rather see someone take it, and it's not worth anything to them anyway.
Right.
So they're just like, yeah, or they'll sell it for really, really cheap. Yeah.
Okay, so I want to talk about the Steve Hicks School at the University of Texas.
Mm-hmm.
Wanted to demolish the building for a new football practice facility.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit about what happened there?
Yeah. The University of Texas is not subject to the city of Austin's permitting requirements.
Right.
So they don't need to get permission from the Historic Landmark Commission like everybody else to demolish.
It's literally its own city.
It's its own thing, exactly. So like we couldn't use our traditional levers, of preservation in Austin. The Steve Hicks School of Social Work building, which is now empty.
Yeah.
When it was built, it was called University Junior High. And it was a collaborative project between the Austin School District, now AISD, and the University of Texas. And it was basically like a learning lab for emerging education professionals. It was the first successfully integrated public school in Austin in 1957.
Wow.
So there was spot integration happening. Individual students were busing to white schools from East Austin, but University Junior High voluntarily integrated in 1957. And I don't know if you know the history of AISD's integration, but Austin did not integrate its public schools fully until the 1970s when the Supreme Court ordered them to basically fall in line with Brown v. Board of Education. So University Junior High integrated nearly like 15 years before the rest of Austin's public school system did.
Wow. When I was going to elementary school, they were still busing us.
That's crazy.
So in the 80s.
Yes, in the 80s.
They were still busing us. I was bused. I lived on the east side and I was supposed to go to L.L. Campbell.
Mm-hmm.
And they took a bunch of us and bused us to Bracker Woods.
Wow.
Over off of 38. So they were still doing it in the 80s.
It took forever.
So this place was the first to voluntarily
integrate. Yeah.
That is crazy.
Yeah, I know. So there's that piece. And then there's also the piece of the Raul Valdez mural, Heart and Soul, which was commissioned in the 90s by the School of Social Work, a really beautiful mural by a very prominent Austin muralist whose the piece is kind of meant to depict the school's mission of justice and repair. We knew it was really important, and so we hooked up with a group of advocates called Save the Past for the Future, who they're former employees of the School of Social Work who kind of banded together and really went to bat and insane grassroots advocacy. Edwin Bautista, who's a student, he wrote a nomination for a state antiquities landmark designation for the School of Social Work building. When they submitted that nomination, it halted UT's plans until it was reviewed by the various bodies, including the Texas Historical Commission, who a few weeks ago voted to designate it as a state antiquities landmark. It doesn't fully prevent them from demolishing it, but it basically makes it so if they want to demolish it or if they want to make any changes, they would have to get approval from the Texas Historical Commission. What comes next, we're not entirely sure, because this is basically the first time that the Texas Historical Commission has voted against a state, a fellow state entity. So it's the state versus the state now. So it's kind of uncharted waters, and the university has the opportunity to appeal, and there's going to be administrative hearings.
Green and White Grocery, recently designated as an official historic landmark.
Mm-hmm.
Now, can you just briefly tell us why that building is important to Austin?
I mean, it's such an iconic location, and the building, and I love that place. And
I did too. I'm totally biased.
It started out, as like a grocery store, and in the 30s, during a time of intense racial and ethnic segregation in town, it's transformed over time. It was a grocery store. They sold tamales out of there. It was kind of like a community sort of hub in the neighborhood, and then it became the Botanica now. And so what I love so much about Green and White is it tells a very dynamic story of East Austin, and a story of East Austin's resilience, in the face of so much change. You can chart the history of East Austin through this building and these different stories and different people that have intersected with it. But yeah, John being the third generation owner too, it's so special and precious. And we really wanted to help them get that designation so that it could stay there forever, And so one of our interns and one of our board members, they put together the nomination packet, and they put together all the research, and then it got approved a few months ago. We're working with people so that they can't demolish it, No. It's going to be there forever. It's ours forever now.
So when something is deemed a historical landmark or an official historical landmark, does that mean that the city helps financially, or does it just mean that it cannot be demolished?
Right now, Austin has a tax incentive program for property owners of historic landmarks. It's structured differently depending on if it's a residential one versus an income-producing one.
So what do you think is the most underrated historic place in Austin?
one of my favorite places in Austin is the Rogers Washington Holy Cross neighborhood in East Austin.
Mm-hmm.
And I say this with like a sense of personal pride because I worked with them a few years ago to make a documentary about their neighborhood's history. So I feel very attached to that neighborhood and that story. But it's such an incredible story of like Black resilience in Austin in the face of Jim Crow segregation and, you know, predatory housing practices. And it's amazing. So in Rogers Washington Holy Cross was a neighborhood that was developed in, well, now Central East Austin, but was more Far East Austin at the time. It's at MLK and like Chestnut. So this was a kind of neighborhood that was developed by a group of Black professionals who kind of wanted the American suburban dream for themselves. And so they were living closer to East Avenue, now I-35, and they wanted to move out and have a little bit more space. But, you know, because of redlining and restrictive covenants and the 1928 master plan, like they could only be in East Austin, and it was really hard for them to get loans. And this is a really common story across the United States, especially in the South. You know, it's like, okay, what do? We create our own institutions, our own wealth building mechanisms. They financed loans for each other and were able to build these really, some of them are incredibly architecturally interesting. And then others they're more modest, but they are still speaking to kind of the pattern of development, like more minimal traditional, but there's some really amazing mid-century modern houses in there. And then more importantly, like the people that lived in this concentrated area is like mind-blowing. One of them was John Q. Taylor King. He was the longest standing president of Huston-Tillotson University. There was Norman Scales Sr. He was a Tuskegee Airman. Brenda Malik, still with us, lives there. She was one of the first Black broadcasters on television in Austin and just a fabulous lady all around. The Calhoun family lives there. Mr. Calhoun was the principal of Keeling Junior High, which was the Black middle school in East Austin until desegregation happened. So just the stories there are crazy, amazing. The people that live there are wonderful. And what I love about it is that it's really intergenerational, and they're lucky because their neighborhood is still relatively intact. You know, it's like second, third generations are living in these homes. And really what's so inspiring about that neighborhood is they saw what was happening, the demolitions that were happening in their neighborhood, and they knew how hard their families and their parents fought to have these homes. Like it was no easy feat to just to exist in this neighborhood and have these houses. And so they were like, what can we do? And through 100% grassroots advocacy, they became a local historic district. It's so cool.
That's where I grew up.
Yeah.
David Chapel is my family church.
It's the best. It's the best.
Not for nothing. As someone who grew up there, it feels really good to drive through that neighborhood and see houses that, like, as a kid, I used to be inside of, and I used to ride my bike around. Yeah. It feels really good. It feels like one of the few places left that's home. If you know what I mean, like it feels one of the few places left on the east side that I'm like, oh my God, this is still my childhood. Miss Banks' house and this house and the Mays house. And yeah, it feels really, really wonderful to just have that little bit of
familiarity. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, what are the next fights over historic preservation going to be in Austin? Do you have any predictions, especially with all of this I-35 expansion and all this stuff happening?
Yeah. The 35 thing, it's kind of one of those unfortunate, like, nothing doing when it comes to the state sometimes.
Right. Yep.
I think it's just going to be more of the same. I just learned that, like, I don't know if Cenote is a legacy business or not, but, like, Cenote is closing down and they're in a historic building.
Yeah, I can't believe it.
It's just kind of like whack-a-mole. So we want everybody else to be, like, preservationists too, you know, and understand that it's not just about the fancy places on the west side. It's about all of us, you know?
Right.
And all these stories.
Do you think it is too late to maintain the history of East Austin, of the east side?
No, can't be. There's so much there. It's never too late. I'll never, you know.
I love that.
Like when they get the last building, that's when it's too late. That's what I think, you know?
That's what's up. I love that.
Just that's like, they can pry it out of my cold dead hands because I'm always at City Hall being like, no, save this one too.
I feel the same way.
And even still, like, even if they tear every single building down, like, The whole city is laced with the history of Black and brown people, even the places where they weren't allowed to live for a long time, you know?
Right.
So you can pretend it doesn't exist, you can demolish it, but their history is woven into every piece of the city, and you can't get rid of it. That soul, that spirit is still there, you know what I mean? Even if it gets demolished. And so
that's the mic drop right there. Is there anything else that we could be doing on our end?
Yeah, I think keep an eye out for Legacy Business Month. It's coming up in October. We're going to be announcing the 10 participating businesses in a couple of weeks, and there's some bangers on there. Legacy Business Month is so fun. And so we'll have some events like an opening party.
I'm ready.
And we're going to have a beer that Zilker Brewing Company is making for us. It's like a way for people to feel good and feel like and have fun while engaging in something that like is pro-preservation and gets people putting their money where their mouth is and like hitting the streets of Austin and going to all these awesome businesses. So we'll have people coming out and celebrating. And then in the spring, we have our annual homes tour, which is super, super fun. And it's citywide. So you get to like go into fabulous homes all over the city. Cool, weird, fancy, not fancy, just every type of historic home we feature on the homes tour. Yeah.
Megan, thank you so much for being with me today. This has been great.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Well, bye. Thank you so much.
Bye.
That's all for today here on CityCast Austin. You can find links to Megan's work in our show notes. If you enjoy the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our Hey Austin newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye, y'all.